On the snowy afternoon of December 20th, Ethan's phone buzzed. They made Grandma leave. HOA said she had until sunset. He blinked at the message, sitting in traffic on I-91 with a paper cup of gas station coffee cooling in his hand. Snow streaked across his windshield like static on an old television. He read the text again, twice, but the words didn't change. 15 minutes later, his rental car turned into Willow Bend, Vermont. The town looked much the same as it had when he was a boy, narrow roads edged with bare trees, modest homes strung with warm Christmas lights, and smoke curling from old chimneys. The sidewalks were stained white with salt, and wreaths, plastic or pine, adorned every other door. All except one. Grandma Maggie's house sat on the corner of Chestnut and Pine, its porch dark and its driveway unshoveled. The front windows were shuttered. A single wreath, bright red felt with mismatched buttons she'd sewn herself, still hung from the door, lopsided and forgotten. Snow had started to build up on the porch railings, softening the angles like dust on a memory. He knocked once. Then again. Silence. Ethan tried the doorknob. Locked. 10 minutes later, he stood outside room 6 of the Fairfield Budget Motel, the kind with flickering neon and doors that opened to the parking lot. Grandma answered the door wearing a cardigan and pink slippers, her white hair tied back in a loose knot. "Ethan," she said, surprised but not unkind. "I thought you were coming tomorrow." "I was," he said. "But, what happened?" She gestured behind her. Cardboard boxes lined the wall inside, some still sealed with packing tape. Her recliner sat awkwardly beneath a motel landscape print, and her cat carrier was balanced on the dresser. Socks spilled out of a laundry basket near the microwave. "The HOA said I had until sunset," she said, smoothing the front of her sweater. "Holiday violations and some landscaping nonsense. I didn't want to make trouble." "You're kidding," he said. "That wreath?" "Among other things," she said softly. "They gave me 48 hours. Becca, the secretary, called and said it'd be easier if I just cooperated. Avoid penalties. So I packed." He looked around. The carpet had cigarette burns. The heater rattled like coins in a coffee can. He hadn't realized how small she looked until now. "Why didn't you call me?" She gave a tired smile. "You're busy. And I thought, it wasn't worth the stress anymore." He didn't reply. Instead, he bent to help her unpack a box of mugs. The first one out said, "World's Best Grandma," in fading paint. His throat tightened. Later, after she fell asleep in the recliner with a blanket pulled up to her chin, Ethan drove back across town to the house. The broken gate creaked when he opened it. Snow had gathered in the path, undisturbed. He brushed frost from the porch railing and noticed the HOA notice still taped crookedly to the glass. Final notice, violations pending, 48 hours to comply or vacate. His breath fogged as he leaned in closer. The paper had warped from damp, ink bleeding down the margin. Next to it, the red wreath clung stubbornly to the door, a scarlet bloom against the gray. One of the buttons, a gold one, was loose on its thread, dangling like it hadn't decided whether to fall or hold on. He stepped back and let his eyes take in the house. The curtains Grandma had hemmed by hand. The birdhouse Ethan made in 6th grade, now half buried in the snow. Everything looked paused, not gone. "It's just a house," she had said earlier. But it wasn't. It was where he'd built his first snowman, where the windows smelled like cinnamon in December, where Grandma taught him how to boil cider and sew a button. Every holiday, every heartbreak, every homecoming had happened right here on this porch. He stepped down, his boots crunching over the packed snow, and looked out over the street. Lights twinkled from neighboring windows. Somewhere, a wind chime clinked against the night. Ethan walked out of the house, breath fogging, and said quietly, "It's worth it now." That night, Ethan opens his laptop and pulls up, Willow Bend County Property Ownership Index. The HOA newsletter headline read, "President Cheryl Whitmore celebrates 12 violations enforced this month." Ethan stared at the printed page taped inside a display case outside the clubhouse. It was printed in Comic Sans, ringed with plastic snowflakes and a clip-art gingerbread man. A photo of Cheryl Whitmore dominated the page, chin lifted, pearls tight at her throat, a snowman brooch gleaming under the headline like a military badge. He thought of what Grandma once said, that woman always smiled like she was chewing lemons. Inside, the HOA clubhouse smelled like fake cinnamon and lemon furniture polish. Faux wood floors echoed with the shuffle of boots and the occasional cough. Holiday decor cluttered the corners, plastic holly, red bows, a life-sized cardboard elf with dead eyes. Ethan slipped into a seat in the back. Just visiting, he had told the woman at the sign-in table. Thinking of moving here. Becca, the secretary, gave a polite smile and a clipboard. "Welcome to Willow Bend," she said. Her voice was soft, almost unsure, like she was used to being talked over. Cheryl called the meeting to order by tapping a silver pen on her notepad. "We've had a very productive month," she began, lips curved tightly. 12 violations addressed. That includes 4 unapproved decorations, 2 improper salt containers, and 1 loose window shutter we managed to resolve with firm encouragement. There were a few nods. A man coughed. Cheryl went on. "Our commitment to a tidy, tasteful community is what makes Willow Bend special. Remember, uniformity is safety. Standards keep us strong." Ethan watched her, noting the way her hand gripped the podium. There was an edge under the festive tone, something rigid behind the talk of snowflake stencils and curb appeal. At intermission, he wandered toward the coffee table and poured a cup. Mr. Hargrove shuffled over beside him. He wore a faded navy coat and a green cap with a Vietnam vet patch stitched above the brim. "They fined me," Mr. Hargrove muttered, as if they were discussing weather, "for keeping a rocking chair on my porch." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Said it was a tripping hazard," the old man added. "Next week it was a bird feeder. After that, our pine cones blocked visibility. My wife cried for 2 days." Back in his car, Ethan jotted quick notes on a pad before heading to the diner. It was nearly empty. A tabletop jukebox blinked under a plastic snowman. An elderly couple sat near the window, their hands folded. The waitress poured black coffee like she'd been doing it for 40 years. He picked a booth and waited. Soon enough, others arrived, Mr. Hargrove again, Mrs. Halpern from 2 doors down, and a balding man with red suspenders who didn't give a name but said, "You're Maggie's grandson, aren't you?" One by one, they shared quiet stories. A child's drawing taken down from a window. A $75 fine for not clearing snow from the sidewalk fast enough. A warning letter about using an orange extension cord for Christmas lights. Words like disgrace, property value, non-compliant repeated in cold fonts on warm paper. "She made people feel small," said Mrs. Halpern, stirring her tea without drinking it. "Like we owed her something for living here." Later that afternoon, Ethan walked into the Willow Bend County Records office. It smelled of old paper and winter coats. A heater clanked in the corner. Behind the counter stood a woman with graying curls and half-moon glasses, reading a paperback romance. Mildred, her name tag read. "Looking for ownership records," Ethan said. She set the book down carefully. "Address?" He gave her grandma's old street number. She typed, adjusted her glasses, and frowned. "Built in 1967, she said. Filed under pre-HOA regulation. That means the house was grandfathered in." Meaning? Meaning they can't legally enforce new cosmetic standards unless there's a structural code issue or major remodeling. He blinked. So the wreath, yard decor, snow shoveling, that was all. She tilted her head. If those were the reasons? Then yes. Improper enforcement. He thanked her and stepped back into the cold. Snow crunched underfoot as he walked to his car, past rows of cars with their Vermont plates lined with salt. The wind tugged at his coat, but inside, something burned steady. "She broke the law to enforce control," he murmured, voice low. Back at the motel, Ethan sat at the desk beside Grandma's recliner, flipping open the folder he'd brought from records. One yellow sticky note waited at the top of the page, written in his own handwriting. Find out if Cheryl's house is HOA owned. The seller accepted immediately, said the realtor. You'll own it by the 23rd. Ethan smiled, perfect. Just in time. Miss Tilda Finch had a candy cane pin clipped to her blazer and a miniature tree blinking on her desk. Plastic tinsel curved unevenly around her monitor. The real estate office hummed with faint carols from the ceiling speakers, Bing Crosby warbling softly about a white Christmas. She tapped the tablet again. It's rare for HOA-owned properties to move this quickly. Are you sure you don't want to walk through it? Ethan shook his head. Already familiar with the street. He tucked the pen into his coat pocket, careful not to smudge the signed forms. Out the window, Willow Bend's narrow lanes sloped under thin ice. Homes blinked with soft lights. Lawns sat dormant beneath fresh snow, each one clipped in uniform, silent proof of Cheryl's regime. The house in question stood pristine on the corner. White colonial style, blue trim, crisp lawn edges, and a regulation-approved wreath, tastefully pale green with ivory bells. It looked like a photograph in a brochure. Ethan didn't linger. Instead, he walked 2 doors down, where another home, smaller, older, freshly vacated, sat waiting. His home now. No welcome mat. No wreath. Just a mailbox that leaned slightly, and a sagging fence gate he'd already made plans to replace. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The place smelled of dry plaster and leftover furnace heat. But it had strong bones and a clear view of Cheryl's front porch. He set down a small duffel and a legal folder. Earlier that morning, he'd returned to the county records office, digging deeper after Mildred helped him uncover the HOA ownership logs. The document trail confirmed it, Cheryl Whitmore was not the owner of her home. The HOA had acquired the property during a foreclosure cycle and leased it to her on a renewable annual basis. When Ethan found the listing, it was almost too easy. The HOA, burdened with a budget deficit noted in archived minutes, had listed several properties quietly to offload liability. He made an anonymous cash offer. Miss Finch never blinked. Now, the deed was his. The ink barely dry. A vibration on the table signaled an incoming call. He answered, keeping his voice level. Ethan Ross. Ross, came Cheryl's voice, sharp and brisk through the speaker. This HOA budget is going to implode if those clowns mess up the transfer codes again. Do you know what kind of lawsuit we risk? If they screw this up, I'm done. He let the tirade play a few more seconds before muting the phone and placing it gently aside. From his coat pocket, he withdrew a folded zoning map. Cheryl's house fell well within the visual easement boundaries, rules she herself had fought to implement 2 years ago. That meant her home's porch decor, bin placement, even the type of snow melt used, was under scrutiny. At 6:45 the next morning, Ethan stood at the bay window with a mug of black coffee. Cheryl's trash bins sat at the curb, wheels caked in snow. The posted collection policy, available on the HOA website, stated bins must not appear before 7 a.m. He took a photo. That evening, her holiday lights flickered in hues of gold and teal, technically non-compliant with the standard, soft white spectrum specified in the most recent HOA handbook. Another photo. Over 3 days, he compiled the moments quietly. A wind chime audible from the sidewalk. A mailbox that failed height requirements by an inch. A recycling bin lid ajar. Each offense logged. Time-stamped. Categorized. In his makeshift home office, just a folding table and a lamp, he opened a fresh folder and printed labels with deliberate care. Violation package, Whitmore. He clipped each photograph, attached copies of the handbook, and cross-referenced every code. The sun dipped behind snow-laced trees. Through the blinds, he could see Cheryl's porch light flicker on. Her silhouette passed by the window, unaware. Ethan turned back to his laptop and began typing. Subject, HOA violation report submission, regarding President Whitmore. Cheryl opened her mailbox to find a notice of non-compliance. For the first time, addressed to her. The paper was folded crisply, its language clinical. Decorative lighting outside approved spectrum. Trash bins placed prior to permitted hour. De-icing procedures not adequately maintained on walkway. Each infraction bulleted beneath HOA letterhead. The morning was clear, snow undisturbed except for the thin wool tracks from the trash truck. Cheryl stood stiffly in her robe and boots, frost clinging to the hem, the paper trembling slightly in her gloved hands. A week ago, she had laughed as she read Grandma Ross's violation aloud to the board. Trash bins out before sunrise, she'd said with a smirk. She should have set an alarm. Now, her own bins had made their appearance at 6:43 a.m., Ethan's time-stamped photos said so. Inside her kitchen, sunlight pooled against granite counters. A peppermint-scented candle flickered half-used on the windowsill. Beside the fridge, the HOA handbook was pinned neatly beneath a novelty magnet shaped like a snow shovel. Cheryl yanked it down and flipped to Section 3.2, Refuse Placement Standards. Absurd, she muttered. The heating vent rattled behind her. Outside, kids shrieked as they slid down hills with dish sleds, scarves trailing like comet tails. Neighbors shoveled their walks in slow rhythm, the scrape of metal on pavement blending with the jingle of porch bells. Cheryl stormed into the HOA office just after 9 a.m. Her boots clacked against laminate floors, the scent of thermal coffee and peppermint candies faint in the air. A faded print of the American flag hung beside the check-in table, its frame slightly askew. Becca sat behind the front desk, her cardigan sleeves pulled down over her hands, posture upright but still. 3 violation notices, Cheryl snapped, slapping the papers down. This is a mistake. Becca blinked slowly. The reports were submitted with clear photos, all time-stamped and filed under procedural order. I verified them myself. Cheryl's jaw tightened. By who? Becca didn't answer immediately. She reached for a folder marked Resident Complaints and slid it open. We don't disclose submitters for individual violations, as per Privacy Clause 2.6. I'm the president. Clause applies to everyone. A silence stretched between them, broken only by the groan of the heating system overhead. Later that evening, Ethan sat in the third row of folding chairs at the HOA monthly review. The room was half full, snow-dampening coats and boots. Peppermint candies sat in a dish near the door, slowly disappearing. A silver thermal pot hissed as Becca refilled her cup. Cheryl entered briskly, face unreadable. She didn't glance at Ethan, though he nodded politely in her direction. 3 separate violations in 1 month triggered probationary review, just as the handbook detailed. The rule had been passed unanimously 2 years ago. Cheryl's own signature was at the bottom of the original draft. Becca read the charges with steady voice. No embellishments. No commentary. Cheryl's rebuttal was sharp, yet careful. Temporary lapse in oversight. Holiday exceptions. Discretion allowed under Article 4. Becca gently shook her head. There's no holiday override on flag condition or de-icing measures. The room remained quiet. Then Mr. Hargrove stood. He leaned slightly on a wooden cane, his green veteran's cap freshly brushed. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but rang across the room like a judge's gavel. If she's enforcing the law, he said, she should follow it, too. No one applauded. No one needed to. The words landed solidly. Cheryl didn't sit back down. Her eyes swept the room once, chin drawn tight. Then she turned and walked toward the hallway beyond the council chairs. Ethan watched her disappear behind the door labeled Board Office, Authorized Only. Inside, Cheryl closed the door and turned the lock with a sharp click. Then she picked up the phone. We're calling an emergency session, she said curtly. Closed door. Do not notify Becca. Christmas Eve, the community center buzzed with chatter, and a subtle divide was in the air. Laughter mingled with the soft strains of Bing Crosby, and pine-scented candles flickered on long buffet tables. Red and green napkins were folded into triangles beside paper plates of gingerbread and molasses cookies. Folding chairs lined the hall, each marked with handwritten name cards in silver ink. Cheryl moved through the room with the practiced grace of someone used to being watched. Her cranberry blazer gleamed under string lights, and she clasped hands, delivered polished smiles, and tapped the microphone for attention every 15 minutes. "Let's recognize the winners of this year's Best Porch Contest," she beamed. "Mr. and Mrs. Lampley, your reindeer carousel is simply delightful." Applause rose, but not with the same warmth it once carried. Some clapped with hands half-raised, others sipped cider in silence. In the back corner, a nativity scene sat beneath the flicker of soft white lights, but no one lingered there long. Ethan stood near the coffee urn, offering a refill to Mr. Hargrove, who had arrived in a tweed coat and winter cap. His cane leaned against the table as he carefully unwrapped a molasses cookie. "They skipped over my driveway snowman again," Hargrove muttered. "You're a rebel," Ethan smiled. That carrot nose was 2 inches past regulation. Becca passed by, clutching a clipboard and pretending to check inventory. Her nod to Ethan was subtle but steady. He handed her a cup of coffee without a word. She accepted it with a quiet "thanks" and slipped away before Cheryl noticed. At 7:42 p.m., Mildred shuffled in through the side door with a tray of homemade oatmeal raisin cookies, a festive tin box balanced on top. Her coat was dusted with fresh snow, her smile polite but unreadable. She made the rounds with greetings, stopping briefly beside Ethan. "Your grandma's missing out," she said gently. "These cookies taste like last year's batch." Ethan smiled, but his gaze lingered on the crowd. Mildred reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a plain manila envelope, and slid it beside his plate. "No copies on file," she said softly. "But I always keep one for myself." Cheryl amended line items in October, never went to vote. He didn't open it then. Just tucked it into his coat, nodded, and helped her adjust her tray. Later, in the parking lot, slush soaked through the edges of boots as cars began to idle and families packed up leftovers. Wreaths adorned SUV grills and minivan hoods, a chorus of red bows bobbing in the winter wind. In a side room with a locked door, Cheryl sat with 2 other board members. The string lights buzzed faintly above them. She was less composed now, smile faded, lipstick worn down at the corners. "If anyone finds out about the second account," she whispered, fingers tight around a ceramic mug, "I lose everything." Becca passed in the hallway at just the right moment, her shoes silent against the tile. The door was cracked slightly, enough to catch the edge of Cheryl's voice. She didn't stop, didn't show a reaction. But her fingers tightened on the phone in her pocket. Back in his rental, Ethan uploaded the budget scans to the County Oversight Board's secure complaint portal. He labeled them precisely, cross-referencing dates, signatures, and account statements. Then he updated his growing file, violation packet, Whitmore, expanded claims. Just after 11:30, Becca texted, "We need to talk. Urgently." At midnight, Ethan stood across the street from Cheryl's house, the snow crunching softly beneath his boots. The neighborhood was quiet, lit only by the glow of colored lights and the occasional flicker from television sets behind curtains. In Cheryl's living room window, a fire danced in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. And there, by its glow, she fed sheet after sheet of paper into a small shredder, her face half-lit, jaw clenched. He watched without blinking, the snow falling in gentle spirals around him. Becca whispered over her coffee, "There's a clause that could get her expelled, but it's buried deep, Section 14B. Steam curled from their mugs in the corner booth of Willow Bend's diner, where the vinyl seats cracked and creaked when shifted against. The window beside them fogged with condensation, framing a world of salted roads and snow-stacked mailboxes. Becca wore mismatched mittens, her eyes clearer than Ethan had ever seen them. "She's used HOA funds for personal dinners, decorations, there's no vote record, no approval. Clause 14B says any such misuse triggers immediate suspension pending a board vote," she said, sliding a crumpled photocopy across the table. Ethan scanned it, the clause highlighted in faint yellow, as if someone had found it long ago but never dared to wield it. He nodded slowly, then flipped open a leather-bound legal pad. Handwritten notes covered the pages, times, dates, line items. A small column was labeled 14B triggers. She's slipping, Becca murmured. Shredding files, closed-door sessions. Cheryl's getting desperate. Back at Ethan's rental, amber light from floor lamps cast shadows on the mess of documents spread across the table. Holiday cards from neighbors sat unopened beside zoning maps and email printouts. Frank's voice crackled through Ethan's phone on speaker. "You've got a real case," Frank said. Clause 14, BS airtight if you show misuse and procedural violation. Mildred's copies and Cheryl's edited versions? That's enough. Ethan highlighted 3 separate transactions: flowers billed to the HOA that ended up on Cheryl's personal balcony, a catering receipt from a private brunch, and the reallocation of discretionary funds without meeting minutes. She funneled reserve money to cover last quarter's party budget, Ethan said. Intentional, Frank agreed. And that's your linchpin. They hung up after syncing on language for the formal packet. Ethan turned back to Becca, who had begun drafting an email on her laptop. Emergency session. January 2nd. She'll hate not being in control, Becca said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Leave her off the CC, Ethan added. Send it to the board only. They worked until the small hours, the clatter of Becca's typing mingling with the soft hum of Ethan's printer. Clause 14b was printed in bold on the cover page. Behind it, timelines, bank ledgers, photo documentation, and Mildred's handwritten annotations. By morning, the envelope was sealed, stamped with the HOA board crest, and resting on the passenger seat of Ethan's car. He passed the community's familiar scenes: sled tracks down the hill, porch lights twinkling, a child's mitten hanging forgotten on a mailbox. Cheryl's house stood straight and still, wreath symmetrical, walkway cleared. A ceramic snowman guarded the porch like a relic from a time when she thought the rules only applied to others. Ethan parked and stepped out. The snow crunched underfoot as he approached the mailbox. He held the envelope a moment, the winter air biting against his fingers, then slid it inside and shut the lid with quiet finality. Delivery confirmed, he said aloud, his voice nearly lost in the hush of the morning. A few hours later, Cheryl pulled into her driveway. She walked to the mailbox, sorting casually until her fingers brushed against the stiff, cream-colored envelope. Her hand paused. Then slowly, she drew it out. She scanned the return address. Her brow creased. And as she tore the flap open, her hand trembled. A flyer taped to every mailbox read, "Emergency HOA session, January 2nd, open to all residents." The wind carried the paper edges into little flutters as residents stepped onto porches, squinting at the bold lettering through half-fogged glasses. Snow melted in gray rivulets along the curb. Christmas decorations sagged with January dampness. And inside Willow Bend's community hall, rows of folding chairs creaked under the weight of expectation. The fluorescent lights hummed. An American flag hung slightly crooked above the head table, next to a worn HOA banner stitched with fading gold thread. Cheryl Whitmore stood at the front, clutching her clipboard with a steadiness that didn't reach her eyes. She cleared her throat, tapping the mic. A screech rang out. "Good evening," she said, her voice brittle. "We're gathered for a routine clarification on recent concerns." "Just a few." Ethan sat in the third row, arms crossed. Becca beside him held a folder in her lap, her jaw tight. Mr. Hargrove, dressed in his old army cap and wool coat, leaned forward on his cane. Cheryl smiled thinly. "There's been some confusion about the holiday expenditures, but I assure you." "Confusion?" Ethan rose, calm but audible. He held up a binder and walked slowly to the microphone. He opened it. "This is a ledger of HOA funds spent from September through December. You'll notice 3 vendors were paid without board approval, none of whom are registered service providers for our community." A rustle moved through the crowd. He flipped another page. "And here are documented fines issued without cause, including to my grandmother, Margaret Ross, for yard decor, fines that violated the grandfather clause for pre-existing properties." Cheryl's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes darted toward Becca, who now stood. "I was asked not to speak," Becca said softly. "But I sat in those meetings. I took notes. Cheryl scheduled planning sessions with no quorum and approved budgets alone. I thought I was helping. I wasn't. Gasps and murmurs rippled across the room. Cheryl stepped back from the mic. This is dramatic. Misinterpreted. Mr. Hargrove shifted in his seat, then stood with effort. For 30 years, I shoveled sidewalks here. Raised 2 boys on these streets. We used to help each other. Then we got rules about lawn heights and mailboxes. His voice cracked. I was fined for my rocking chair. That chair was from my wife's mother. Silence deepened. This isn't just about a budget, he said. It's about dignity. About who we are. A voice from the back rang out, vote. Vote now. Second that, another shouted. Soon, a low chant started, vote. 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 Becca reached into her folder. According to Charter subsection 3C, any board member may call for a vote of confidence if presented with community petition and grounds for review. I have both. She handed the paper to the moderator, a quiet man with a silver beard and tired eyes. He skimmed it, then nodded. All in favor of temporary suspension of Cheryl Whitmore pending formal review, raise your hand. Hands rose like a wave, older women in quilted coats, men with snow-dusted boots, young couples holding toddlers. Not one stayed lowered. The moderator sighed. Unanimous. Cheryl gathered her clipboard slowly, the faint tremble in her fingers betraying the smile she attempted. As the crowd stood and chairs scraped the linoleum, Cheryl passed Ethan by the door. She paused, her lips parting in a whisper sharp as sleet. You think this is over? She said. Then she was gone, boots crunching into the half-frozen slush outside. Ethan turned the corner and saw it. The porch light at Grandma's old house was on again. The soft orange glow cast a gentle halo over the snow-dusted steps, catching the edge of the wooden birdhouse he'd reattached that morning. Just beneath it, the familiar porch swing creaked ever so slightly in the wind. It had taken 3 months of meetings, petitions, and quiet planning, but somehow, in the silence of this early January dusk, everything felt right again. Inside, the home smelled of cinnamon and something faintly floral, Grandma's linen drawer sachets, Ethan guessed. The heater hummed, freshly repaired and radiating warmth across the polished wood floors. Maggie Ross sat at the small kitchen table, sorting photo albums while a tray of cookies cooled beside her. The oven door clicked softly as it settled from use. I didn't think I'd see this place again with the lights on, she said, brushing a stray crumb from a yellowed Polaroid. Ethan crouched beside her, glancing at the photo. Him, age 8, holding a snow globe and grinning. Grandma had scrawled "First Christmas in Willow Bend" across the border in her looping cursive. The memory struck him warm and sudden, like a door opening to a long-forgotten room. Outside, the neighborhood slowly came to life. One by one, neighbors arrived with casserole dishes, foil-wrapped pies, and warm greetings. Mr. Hargrove, in his veteran's cap, offered a firm handshake and a loaf of cranberry bread. The Watson twins brought a jigsaw puzzle and 2 mugs of cocoa, complete with tiny floating marshmallows. Even the usually silent Mrs. Benning waved from her porch across the street, her Christmas lights blinking unevenly but earnestly. Mildred stood near the driveway, clipboard in hand, chatting with Becca as they crossed off names from a list. The interim HOA board had been officially formed just yesterday, 2 votes to every one, all open, recorded, and signed. Cheryl's name no longer sat on any letterhead. Ethan watched as Grandma stepped onto the porch, pulling her shawl tight around her shoulders. She sank gently into the swing, its worn cushions replaced but still the same color she remembered. The sound of children sledding echoed faintly through the cold as laughter spilled into the yard. He joined her, steaming mugs of cocoa in hand. You didn't just save this house, Ethan. You saved this whole street. The words were quiet, but they settled deep. He smiled, clinked his mug to hers, and looked out at the snow-covered neighborhood with its twinkling porch lights and restored peace. A car turned the far corner slowly, tires crunching against slush. A familiar red sedan. Cheryl didn't stop. She didn't wave. she simply passed by the house she no longer governed, her face unreadable behind the windshield's glare. The mailbox creaked as the postal worker's gloved hand slid something in. Ethan rose and retrieved the envelope. A single sheet inside, county letterhead at the top. Notice of oversight investigation opened, Cheryl and Ferris. He folded it once, twice, tucked it beneath his arm, and stepped back into the soft light of the porch. Well, they'll take it from here. As fresh snow settled over Willow Bend, the porch light at Maggie Ross's home glowed once more, a quiet sign that dignity had returned where it once was denied. What began as one eviction became a stand, not just for a grandmother, but for every neighbor who'd learned to live in silence. When rules are twisted for control, they become chains, but when challenged with truth, they can be reforged into shields. Perhaps it's never too late to join hands with neighbors and gently remind the powerful who truly owns the porch lights. Like a steady wreath in winter's wind, one act of courage can hold its place long after the storm.